Welcome everyone, Costin here with a discussion about the High Elven Legendary Lords in Total War Warhammer Free Immortal Empires. I did one for the Dark Elves. I think it's fair to talk about the High Elves, who are also a pretty good race, and I would strongly recommend playing most of their campaigns except for one, the one I'm going to start this list with, and that is Imrik. Imrik himself is pretty strong in his own army, on a combat level, on an individual level. I guess this does reflect that he is very selfish in the lore, but he is very strong. He does get significant bonuses for dragons, recruitment, dragon taming, getting super powerful dragons, benefits to a greater invocation of Vol, enable flaming attacks for all armies. That's one of the few faction-wide benefits that you're going to get, by the way, with the invocation of Vol. Now, item-wise, he does get, if he gets a set, control to all provinces. If he gets the Armor of Calidor, if he fights and wins that quest battle, which shouldn't be too big of an issue. Though, honestly, the Armor of Destiny is actually probably better, though the Vigor loss reduction, for his own survival, that is. Though, the Vigor loss reduction of minus 33% is pretty significant. The thing is, he has very few faction-wide benefits outside of maybe some bonuses he gets to from the dragons. And the nobles. He gets noble recruitment all provinces, and he has +3 capacity for nobles. That's a fairly significant early game buff once you get him to level 12. And then he gets research rate. But most of these benefits, if you look at them, most of these benefits are for his own army. And he's already pretty strong. The strongest legendary lords, the strongest factions generally have significant bonuses to their faction, not just to themselves. And Imrik, yeah, he's mainly about buffing himself, his own army, his own troops, not the troops of his entire faction. Another problem is his start position. Now, it's nowhere near as miserable as Immortal Empires, and he can trade with Ulfon if he does get confederate with Calidor. But confederating with Calidor is a pretty messy affair. I imagine they're gonna fix that, but even when they fix that, he's still gonna be neck deep in problems from the very start. He starts at war with the dwarves, which can be a good counter for the elves, but as I've said, he does have a pretty good army. But your early game battles are going to be not necessarily very difficult, but slow, I'd use the term. But beyond that, he's in this area, which is one of the worst areas of the game. He's got ogres, he's got orcs, and he's got Treach Raventail. Now, the problem with dealing with Skaven, especially as the High Elves, or as any faction really, but I would say especially as the High Elves, is that the Skaven on any high difficulty are going to get, let's say, 2.5 stacks, more or less. That's on Legendary. Lower difficulties, of course, less, but they're going to get a lot of armies and swarm you in rats. That's really what defines their race on the tabletop and the lore, even in this game. Just the sheer masses of Skaven that are going to come your way. So Craventail can be quite an issue to deal with, and a slow issue. I've done a campaign guide. It can be pretty slow going because you have to wait for him, Craventail, to be vulnerable before you take him out. But beyond that, his whole position here in Darklands is not great at all. Large area, vulnerable on all sides from multiple factions, and you don't have the economy and the faction benefits to really deal with that. There are lords that may have harder starting positions, but can deal with them because they have the benefits faction-wide or lord-wise to tackle those issues. Imrik does not. His one main benefit is he does start with a pretty good fire mage in Mikela, or he starts with a fire mage, who is going to give you significant benefits. And later on in the game, once you do get his personal skills, once you get his dragon, once you get some of the super powerful dragons, he can become one of the strongest legendary lords in the game. In fact, he's one of the few legendary lords in the game that's riding a massive mount like that is incredibly good in a combat situation. Someone like Malekith gets sniped easily. Imrik can be impossible to kill, as people have discovered when facing him. So he's pretty powerful on a personal level, but yeah, he has the hardest campaign, and he's the weakest of all of the legendary lords of the elves because he doesn't have the faction-wide benefits to support that. You can gain some pretty good temporary buffs from the various dragons you can interact with, but that's really about it. Then moving on, at number 5, we have Teclis. Poor Teclis. He's always had a harsh situation in his campaign, though I would certainly say in Immortal Empires he's in a much better position, as he starts in a pretty far south, in a relatively safe position, in a good situation to deal with. And he can certainly get an economy going, and he can get trade going, though contacting Wolf-1 is going to be an issue. I feel Imrik and Teclis could really benefit by having vision, at least, over the Wolf-1 factions, getting trade going. But Teclis has pretty much a similar issue as Imrik. He is not in the same trouble spot as Imrik. His starting area is much better from that perspective. However, when you look at the benefits that he gets diplomatic relations. Okay, that can prevent some pointless wars. That's about it. And get alliances and trade agreements going with the factions that you are going to encounter, though Imrik himself can encounter Wolf-1 much easier than Teclis can. And the Wolf-1 factions are going to be your main trading partners, but first you need to contact them. I'd probably recommend sending an agent to try and contact Wolf-1. That will probably help you out. But then he does get the benefit to Loremasters, Mages, and Archmages, plus 5 recruit rank. So it means when you're recruiting a Lord, you're recruiting them at level 6. That is pretty nice. And sadly, however, that's probably one of his few significant faction-wide benefits. If we look at his items, he does have a lot, and all he's getting is +1 control and Winds of Magic for his army. He can get a lot of Winds of Magic through his skill tree. That's true, and he does get some significant benefits to magic. But that's pretty much it. Hero action and success chance and action cost doesn't really matter in this game. Ward save, okay. For Loremasters, okay, that's pretty substantial, 10% for mages and Loremasters. But unlocking a substantial number of them for that to be useful, pretty difficult. He doesn't have any significant benefits that would help you in the early game, except that diplomatic situation. And even then, that is a limited value considering the way the AI treats you. His item, he's really one of those lords that by and large, with some exceptions like the War Crown and Safri, he's by and large going to be really powerful with his own army, but he doesn't buff his faction all that much. Except for mages, those can be substantial buffs, but again, it's limited in scope. And that means he falls behind the other legendary lords in the High Elves, or a lot of legendary lords that do exist in this game. This is due to outdated design coming from Warhammer 2 into Warhammer 3, because in Warhammer 2, buffing your own army by such a substantial amount did matter a lot. In Warhammer 3, it's really all about buffing a significant portion of your faction, buffing multiple armies of your faction. That's what makes certain legendary lords stronger than others. And Teclis, yeah, he's not that great in that respect. And he does have a lot of neighbors, some friendly, some not so friendly. The Southlands is not a great campaign area overall, though Teclis and Kairos, who starts over here, and yeah, they're gonna have the magical duel of the ages. He and Kairos are certainly in a relatively good starting position. That's what elevates him above Imrik, the starting position. Though I feel like they have the same issue where they buff themselves a lot, but they don't buff their faction in a sufficient amount for them to really reach higher ranks. At number 4, we have Alarielle the Everqueen. Alarielle is one of the strongest characters in Warhammer fantasy lore, and if you look at Age of Sigmar, yeah, it's even stronger than that. She, like the others, gets 1 control to all provinces if she gets all of the items. The items themselves, yeah, they do offer some fairly nice benefits to her own army. Skill-wise, she does get control, income benefits, recruit rank for handmaidens, benefits to diplomatic relations with the High Elves, construction cost benefits, recruitment duration reduction for Sisters of Avalorn, which are some of the top tier units for the High Elves in the late game, or the mid to late game. She's okay. if we look at the skill tree. Faction benefit-wise, she does get bonuses when all of Wolf 1 is held by the High Elves, but the downside of that, of course, is that she loses quite a bit when Wolf 1 is not under the control of the High Elves. So and that's your starting situation. So you're gonna suffer a bit in terms of diplomatic relations, control, construction cost, and income from all buildings. The construction cost is actually quite a bit of an issue. You don't start in a great position, though you can certainly get the Phoenix Gate pretty quickly and secure inner Wolf 1, and that is going to help you quite a bit. What I'd say elevates Alarielle is that she does get benefits, like when she visits a region, or rather visits a province, she gets Power of Nature, which gives influence, control, growth, and minus corruption. So she's in a pretty good state from that perspective. On top of that, she gets a unique building over here in the Gaian Vale, and she can colonize magical forests, which can be pretty useful when you're thinking about invading Alpha Larn potentially. But she can get Treekin, Treemen, Dryads, and those units are incredibly good. She starts with it at tier 2. It's not too much of a stretch to imagine her getting to tier 3 and getting a Treekin army, and she is in a pretty good state to be able to make use of that. Though she doesn't necessarily have an upkeep benefit to maintain very large numbers of Treekin, but the elves don't need very large numbers of Treekin. They just need a couple, and they'll shred everything that stands in their path. Some of the best early game range units combined with Treekin, yeah, that army is incredibly powerful. Pretty much similar to how powerful a Wood Elven army can be. So yeah, she leaves lingering bonuses. She weakens as casts grow stronger, but she also gets a missile strength benefit for Sisters and Handmaiden units in her own army. She does start with the Sisters unit. She does start with the Handmaiden. She is in a pretty good spot. She's not the best combatant herself, though she has the easiest access to the Sword of Cain over here because she starts a war with the faction that does control it. Sadly enough, she can't colonize the Wasteland very well, so it is going to cost her a bit to colonize this and get the Sword of Cain, and she's also going to have to deal with Nakari early on. But once she gets going, she gets going. She has a significant amount of power if you build her up, if you conquer a lot of territory, if you secure Wolf 1. And yeah, she is pretty damn strong overall. Not as strong as some others. I'd say her start can be a bit weak, given all the issues she's going to have from the very start. But once you do get going, once you do ramp up with her, she is quite incredible. Get the Sword of Cain on her. She has enough diplomatic benefits with the High Elves at the very least to afford using the Sword of Cain, and Alarielle with the Sword of Cain is quite scary. She does get the Great Eagle mount, which is significant because it allows her a great deal of mobility and power on the battlefield. It's not the dragon, but it's actually far more nimble and powerful than that because it allows you a great deal of flexibility. She is also a magical caster like Teclis, though she's certainly nowhere near the level of power that Teclis is, but she's pretty okay. She has substantially better faction-wide benefits than Teclis does. If there's any downside with Alarielle, yeah, it's like controlling all of Wolf 1 can be a pain, so you don't have the downside here. That can be a bit of a pain, or rather the High Elves controlling all of Wolf 1, because you do have the Dark Elves over here that Tyrion starts the war with, you have the Scourge of Cain that you start at war with. That can be a bit annoying to deal with for like, let's say 10, 20 turns, and then Noctilus of course off the coast of Caledor over here, and then Nakari over here in Crix. All of that can be annoying, but once you get going, once you sort that out, once you get your Treekin and Treemen, etc., she is in a really good and strong position in her campaign. And you can't do wrong playing as Alarielle. The DLC that added her, well, I'd say Hellebrand doesn't hold a candle to Alarielle. Like, Hellebrand is something of a joke. Alarielle is pretty scary to face on the campaign map, actually, if you're fighting her. And as her, yeah, you do have a great deal of power available to you. And number 3, we have Alith Anar, and to be quite honest with you, I was considering putting him even number 2. Not number 1, number 2 on this list. But I decided against it. There are some things that do hold him back, but let's be clear on this. Alith Anar is a powerhouse of a legendary lord. Not himself. He is actually fairly weak in battles on a personal level. Not in the sense that his army is weak, far from it. In fact, his army is incredibly good. but he personally is a ranged lord, and experience that I've had in Total War so far is that ranged lords tend to be pretty crap. They have issues landing their shots effectively. They have issues getting the damage done on either armies or other lords. So yeah, you can focus on making him a sniper, and he can be pretty decently effective in that. He does gain campaign movement range 8% after winning a battle once you get the set bonus together, which is like he's a miniature Scarbrand or Tarax, depending on how you want to view him. That's the first benefit, though, that should clue you in as to how this guy actually plays, because he is not about his it's not about his personal damage, it's about the various campaign benefits that he gets, and he gets a lot of them, some of the which are not necessarily going to the game's not necessarily going to tell you from the very start. So what does he get? Beyond getting campaign movement range after a battle, he gets 10% campaign movement range for all armies faction-wide. He reduces global recruitment by 1 turn. Fairly substantial bonus, because it allows you to recruit a lot of units, especially lower tier units, but even higher tier units, very quickly across the campaign map, which is a fairly substantial benefit. Then on top of that, he gets an upkeep to Shadow Walkers and Shadow Warrior units. Now, Shadow Walkers and Shadow Warriors, yeah, they're gonna shred everything that does stand in their path if you use them correctly. They've got stock, they've got good range, Vanguard deployment, they are pretty good units. They have the same issue in terms of their range prowess as the Elven Archers, in that they are lacking when it comes to armor piercing, but they're okay. And he can have a lot of them, and they will do incredibly well in a battle situation. So he has a pretty good army that's actually fairly early game. How early game? Well, you only need tier 2 to be able to unlock these guys, and the structure you recruit them from the camp will give you benefits to ambushes and ambush defense stance, as well as hero action chance for local characters and reducing campaign movement range of enemies. But that should clue you in where Alith Anar stands. Now, when we're looking at his skill tree, he gets fear, because his lore is like, he's vengeance filled. He wants to butcher the Dark Elves. That's what his faction is all about, butchering the Dark Elves. He gets ammo benefits and melee attack and speed to Shadow Walkers, making a pretty good unit even stronger. Weapon strength and missile strength when fighting Dark Elves, which is one of his main things. Ambush chance 15%. 12 missile strength, though at the cost of diplomatic relations with the High Elves, so you don't really care about that. You can always manage diplomatic relations with other High Elven factions for the influence system pretty well. 12% missile strength, all armies faction-wide. And then the Shadow King, which is controlled to all provinces, and an ability to create an image of Alith Anar, so 50% more damage. And then 15% campaign movement range with perfect vigor for him after winning a battle. I wasn't joking when I said this guy is miniature Scarbrand or Tarax. He has the same benefit that they do. Honestly, it won't be as powerful as Scarbrand or Tarax, but it is still very, very good. Because understand, this is on top of everything that the High Elves have. They're great archer units, they're great infantry line, they're great roster in general, they're good economy, public order, you name it. He gets a lot of things on top of that. This is one of the big reasons why I wanted to potentially put him even higher on this list, because yeah, he might deserve it. Now here's the thing, because this is where things get a bit crazy. His default stance is called stalking. It has a minus 15% ambush chance, but it gives you a chance of ambushing through your default movement. It gives you a chance of ambushing. This guy is playing like the Beastman, or honestly the Skaven, and that can be incredibly powerful, just ambushing through regular movement on the campaign. But then it goes even further. He can use the Shadow Realm, which traverses terrain that would normally be impassable via the Shadow Realm. Now, for whatever reason, you can't do this. You can't set the stance when you're in a settlement. which is a bit of an issue because you can use the Underwave when you're in settlement, but you can't use the Shadow Realm but when you're a settlement, so you need to be in open field to use this. But yeah, it allows you to traverse terrain that would be impassable, so mountains, all that, those issues. This is one of Imrik's problems. He doesn't have a good way of dealing with the mountains. Alith Anar does have a good way of dealing with that. Hell, I think they should swap positions in some way, though obviously it wouldn't make sense from a lore perspective between the two of them. But yeah, Alith Anar gives significant faction-wide benefits to his faction. He can get a unique hero capable of assassinating without fail, so you want to kill an enemy lord, you can assassinate them very easily using that. And that actually ties together in his assassination missions, because he gets assassination missions that will give him substantial benefits to his faction for quite a bit. He gets diplomatic relations with other High Elves. So much for that skill tree, right? 20 diplomatic relations, recruitment capacity. He's got them. He's got quite a bit of that. So he's in a really, really good spot. He gets significant benefits, influence, and a bit of money, though not necessarily all that much. But he gets substantial amounts of influence and faction-wide benefits for doing these missions. Yeah, he's pretty damn good. He's pretty strong if you do those missions, and they're not really hard to do, because again, you have a right to summon a hero that will do these missions for you, and you do have a pretty good amount of time to be able to do them. The one downside is if someone eliminates these guys instead of you being able to do them, that can be a bit of an issue, but you're not losing anything if you don't do these missions. You're not failing anything. You only stand to gain if you do these missions. So yeah, Alith Anar is like, he's got all the benefits of the High Elves, with some of the benefits of Skarbrand and Tarax, some of the benefits of Skaven, if you will. And it's like, he's like just this weird combination, the unholy child of Skarbrand, Tarax, and Snitch, actually. It is a pretty scary and crazy combination when you think about it. And honestly, on fun factor alone, I wouldn't say he's the best legendary lord of the High Elves, but fun factor alone, he's probably the most enjoyable campaign from that perspective of all of the High Elven legendary lords. Not the strongest, probably the weakest actually in personal combat ability. He's a ranged hero. He's not going to do very well personally. His army is going to be good, though it's not the dragon army that Imrik has, for instance. But his army is going to be pretty good, especially with all the ambushes this guy is going to be able to get going. He's in a good spot. And he does offer a unique way of playing the High Elves. Highly recommended. At number 2, it is Tyrion. Of course, it is Tyrion. It had to be Tyrion. He's been one of the strongest legendary lords ever since Warhammer 2 came out. He is one of the strongest legendary lords of the High Elves, and for a long time he was number 1, for good reasons. He's an incredible combatant on the battlefield, but he also gets substantial campaign-wide benefits. How substantial? Well, recruitment duration, -1, faction-wide for infantry and cavalry units. The infantry part is the one that's really going to matter. Construction time, -50% for the Shrine of Cain, so you can get the Sword of Cain much easier. You don't really need it. Tyrion is incredibly powerful with his default weaponry. And 10 diplomatic relations with High Elves. I'd say the recruitment situation is really the one that matters, but that's not all there is with him. He also gets 50% upkeep benefit for Spearmen, Silver Guard, Rangers, Archers, and Silver Helm units, which is pretty good. He gets recruit rank, a +3 for Lavern, Sea Guard. He gets some really good items, though right now I would not recommend playing Tyrion because getting the Heart of Avalon is bugged, since you need to take the Phoenix Gate if you want to get it, and yeah, good luck with that, since chances are Alarielle is going to take it out before you and raise it to the ground. She does that and will prevent you from being able to get it. But he does have some really good items, and skill-wise, he's in a really good spot. You have 2 choices here at the top. You can either focus on his own combat ability, but he's really good to begin with, or more likely you can focus on a campaign benefit. You know how he starts with global recruitment capacity benefit already? How about you double that? Also, global recruitment rank capacity +2. Recruitment cost minus 10%. 10%. Diplomatic relations +20. Control +1. 13 income from buildings. A leadership aura minus 10% upkeep from for all armies and minus 10 corruption local province. These are substantial campaign benefits for a guy who is an absolute monster on the battlefield. Tyrion is very hard to kill, genuinely very hard to kill. His sword is really good. He can do a lot of damage. He can take a lot of armies on his own, really. Give this guy the Sword of Cain, he is an absolute monster with it. But even without it, he is still a monster. Even without it. He can get cheaper armies. He can get a lot of recruits very quickly. He can get diplomacy going with the High Elves in a way no one else can. And all of those are substantial benefits, because the diplomatic benefits he gets allows him to unify Ulthuan much faster, much easier than anyone else. So yeah, Tyrion is in a really good spot. He's always been in a really good spot. That hasn't changed throughout Warhammer 2. It hasn't changed with Warhammer 3. He starts in a really good position as well. Lothern is a great province because it gets the Straits of Lothern, which you then upgrade to the Harbor of Lothern even further. Gives you substantial amount of income growth for the province, recruit rank on top of the one that Tyrion gets. It's a 4-region province, so that's going to generate you a substantial amount of income. Like, this is turn 23 and I'm already generating 2,000, and this is not its final form. Because once I get to 100 control, which is perfectly doable, once I get to 100 control, I'm going to be generating substantially more money, especially once I get the dedicated income buildings and I'm not just relying on the public order ones with an income benefit on the side, so to speak. But yeah, Tyrion is incredibly good in both battle and campaign. Alith Anar, yeah, he's probably better when it comes to faction-wide benefits, at least in terms of the ambushes that he can spring on people, but Tyrion doesn't need that. What's very important to understand, that Tyrion allows you to field very large armies. More armies than pretty much anyone else. They may not be the best armies, but quantity is a quality of its own, and Tyrion really embodies that for the High Elves. And the way Immortal Empires is right now, I'd say by far and away, considering the playstyle, he might be in the best position to just steamroll the map, more so than any other Legendary Lord of the High Elves. Finally, at number 1, it is Eltharion the Grim. Now you might be confused about that, because Eltharion doesn't seem to be all that exceptional, really, when you think about it. When we look at his skill tree, he's mainly buffing himself and defenses, really. I mean, he gets construction time -2 for wall and garrison buildings. That can be nice, right? And construction cost, that can be nice if you're trying to fortify various regions. He does get the global recruitment benefit and -25% recruitment cost for his own army, as well as campaign movement range. But nothing is exceptional here, except what he really gets for the Mistwalkers for his own army. He's nowhere near the combat ability that Tyrion has, however. And we're looking at the items, yeah, control, global recruitment capacity. That global recruitment capacity is pretty sweet, however. But here's the thing, why I think Eltharion deserves the number 1 spot, from my perspective. Okay, so he's got the mists of Ivres, right? And when you get the mists spread out, which spread to any region of Ulthuan owned by a defensive or military ally, then that's a pretty substantial combat benefit. Okay, that can be a substantial combat benefit. However, that's just the start, because Eltharion's true power is through these dungeons. Now, in the dungeons, you can, during battle, you get an enormous benefit for every army through the prison, because you can cast a major debuff on any lord, legendary lords, and capture them. When you capture them, you can interrogate them. Interrogating them gives you experience, can give you supplies, which you can use to upgrade the structures over here. And you can also get benefits for Mistwalker units. I'll get into those in just a second. But there are certainly substantial benefits. You can get influence benefit, you can get more benefits to Mistwalker units. unit capacity for Mistwalker units over here. Okay, but why is that important? Why are the Mistwalker units so important? Because they're the best units in the High Elven roster, by far. Like, it's not even comparable. Only I think only the Sisters of Avalon and the high-tier dragons compared to them. And even then, there's some units that will certainly give those a run for their money. Like, if we look at the Mistwalker units themselves, understand that by default, they're pretty good. By default. Like Spire Guard, the Faith Bearers, moving on, the Skyhawks, the Sentinels, and then finally the Knights of Torgaval, which are the best units for the High Elves. They've got incredible weapon strength. Like, these guys compared to Legendary Lords when we're thinking about weapon strength. And the Interrogation allows you to give these guys further buffs, like a WAP benefit, for instance. If you are fighting Greenskins, you interrogate a Legendary Lord or Lord of the Greenskins. It's actually not a good idea to interrogate the Legendary Lords. You're not necessarily going to get a huge amount. You can also steal income from a faction by capturing someone and then releasing him, and that will add to your income. There was a very substantial cheese available in Warhammer 2, which gave people pretty much infinite amount of income, allowing them to be ridiculously rich. But yeah. Eltharion wins because he has some of the best units that are unique to him. That's the key element here. The Mistwalker units, by default, are unique to him. Like, yeah, if you confederate them, you can get some. But recruiting them outside of that, yeah, good luck with that. So, he gets an army roster. He gets a couple or 5 unique units that are really, really good. Like, the Faith Bearers are pretty solid. The Spire Guards are pretty solid, the Skyhawks are pretty solid, the Sentinels, and the Knights, yeah, they're absolutely very solid. They're expensive, don't get me wrong, they're very expensive. But in terms of tier 5 units, they might be some of the best in the entire game. And someone who has an entire army roster that not only is good by default, but he can buff through the stratosphere, I feel deserves that #1 spot. See, the thing is, High Elves will have a good economy. Eltharion will start with a huge amount of treasure and can get even more if he gets the Oath Gold mine over here. He does have an issue in that the campaign victory conditions aren't really suited right now, because you need to control for a long victory, you need to control all of Wolf 1 and wipe out the Dark Elven factions, which is not what his campaign is supposed to be about. But outside of that particular problem, he is in an incredibly good spot. His campaign start position might be a bit miserable, but you can just disband his army and play an Ulf 1 campaign with him if you so desire. Though you're giving up on a lot of early game growth and a lot of early game money if you do so. So just bear in mind. Though there is a way to cheese that. I think he does certainly need some updates to make his campaign better. But at the same time, yeah, it's hard to argue with him. Again, he's nowhere near Tyrion's personal combat level, and maybe his campaign faction benefits aren't probably not on the same level as Alarielle or Alith Anar. But the armies this guy can create are some of the best High Elven armies in the entire game. Not the same quantity as Tyrion, but quality absolutely higher. If we're talking about Mistwalker units. Though there is going to be a limit of how many Mistwalker units you can recruit, just be aware of that. But they can be really strong. And that's all there is to say right here. Costin here signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, enable notifications, and I'll see you next time.